Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. Before we begin today's story, we must first return to the cold and fractured battlefield that the Bartlett Fleming family has become. In our last episode, we watched as Lindy's 10th birthday became a painful demonstration of the family's division. Two separate parties, two separate worlds, and one confused little girl caught in the middle. The episode ended with Lindy's heartbreaking wish to add Aunt Lou's picture to the locket, a simple desire that seemed impossible in their broken family. If you're enjoying this season, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Now today, the immense pressure of this conflict is about to find its breaking point in the most unexpected and terrifying way possible. The days following Lindy's birthday were darker than any that had come before. The silence in the Dude Ranch Lodge was no longer just uncomfortable, it had become a weapon. Tim and Lou moved through the house like ghosts, barely speaking even to each other, each consumed by their own version of the war they'd started. Lou had retreated completely into the legal battle. She sat at her laptop for 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day, the blue glow of the screen making her face look pale and skeletal. She was no longer a sister or an aunt or even really a daughter. She was a general in a war she was beginning to suspect she couldn't win, but one she was now too proud and too committed to surrender. The joy and warmth that had always been her center was gone, replaced by a grim efficiency that was slowly eating her alive from the inside. Tim was different. He was a storm barely contained, a hurricane of anxious energy that filled every room he entered. He paced the floors of the lodge like a caged animal, his boots making angry rhythmic sounds that seemed to punctuate their misery. He was on the phone constantly, his voice sharp and aggressive as he hounded their lawyer, their banker, anyone who might give him the victory he desperately needed. He projected an image of powerful, decisive control. But underneath the bluster, he was a man coming apart at the seams. The ticking clock, the mounting costs, the secret guilt he carried, all of it was eating away at him like acid. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning, a day that started like any other day of simmering hostility. Tim was on the phone with Ms. Jennings, their expensive and aggressive lawyer. The conversation wasn't going his way. She was speaking in calm, measured tones about the slow and methodical nature of legal proceedings, and Tim wasn't listening. He didn't want to hear about procedure. He wanted victory, swift, brutal, and decisive.
I don't want to hear about due process. I want results. You told me you were a shark. Well, I'm not seeing a hell of a lot of teeth here.
His voice was loud and unreasonable, filling the quiet lodge and making Lou flinch at her end of the table. He stood by the window, his back to the room, his entire body rigid with barely controlled rage.
What do you mean? Their lawyer filed a counter-motion. This is our property. We're the majority trustees. We should be able to do whatever the hell we want with it.
He was losing control, the frustration and fear finally overwhelming his carefully constructed facade. It was in this exact moment that the first quiet warning shot was fired inside his own body. A sudden tightness in his chest, a dull, insistent pressure behind his sternum. He ignored it, too consumed by his own rage. He took a sharp, ragged breath and plunged back into the fight.
No, you listen to me. I want you to file another motion. I want an injunction to stop their pathetic work at that ruin. I want you to bury them in paperwork. I want you to crush them. Do you understand me? I want you to...
He stopped. The words caught in his throat. The tightness in his chest was no longer dull pressure. It had become sharp, stabbing, alarming pain. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and the familiar landscape outside the window seemed to tilt and swim before his eyes. The edges of his vision began to go fuzzy and gray. He reached out, grasping the back of a nearby armchair to steady himself. The voice on the phone became distant and irrelevant. The only sound he could hear was his own heart, a frantic, panicked hammering like a trapped bird beating itself to death against his ribs. The pain in his chest was no longer a stab. It was a crushing, suffocating weight, an invisible hand squeezing the life out of him. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't think, he couldn't see. The phone slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, clattering loudly onto the hardwood floor. He let out a single choked, strangled gasp, a sound of pure animal pain. He stumbled, his legs no longer obeying him, and collapsed into the armchair. His face went ashen gray. His hand clutched at his chest. His mouth opened. His eyes went wide with the naked terror of a man who was absolutely convinced he was about to die. The clatter of the phone hitting the floor was what finally broke through Lou's concentration. She looked up from her laptop, her initial expression one of weary annoyance. Her father's theatrical displays of rage had become the exhausting soundtrack to her miserable new life. She opened her mouth to deliver a sharp rebuke. But the words died on her lips. The sight before her wasn't a performance. It wasn't a tantrum. The man collapsed in the armchair was not a general or a patriarch. He was a victim, a casualty, a man in the grip of something far more powerful than any family feud. His face was a color she'd never seen on a living person before, pale, waxy, unnaturally gray. His eyes were wide and white, full of stark animal terror. His hand clutched at his chest in a desperate, pathetic gesture, as if he were trying to physically hold his rebelling heart together inside his body. He was making a sound, a low, guttural, wet, gasping sound, the sound of a man trying to breathe through wet concrete. The cold, professional shell Lou had built around herself shattered into a million useless pieces. The lawyer, the strategist, the co-conspirator, all of it vanished. In its place was a daughter, a terrified, helpless little girl watching her father die.
Dad?
Her voice was a small, pathetic squeak. She flew from her chair and across the room in blind panic. She fell to her knees beside him, her hands hovering uselessly over his arm, his shoulder, his chest, afraid to touch him, afraid of the terrible, fragile reality of him.
Dad, what's wrong? What is it?
He couldn't answer. He just looked at her, his terrified eyes begging for help she didn't know how to give. The only answer was another of those terrible, ragged gasps for breath that didn't seem to come.
Lisa!
Her voice was a raw, animalistic shriek that tore through the oppressive silence of the lodge, a sound of pure primal panic. Lisa appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, a dish towel in her hand, her face a mask of concern. Then she saw him. Her face went as pale and gray as his. She didn't scream, she didn't panic. The quiet, capable strength that had been her anchor her entire life took over. Lou, help me get him onto the sofa. We need to lay him down. Together, wife and daughter, a unified and terrified team, managed to get Tim's heavy, limp frame out of the chair and onto the long, flat surface of the nearby sofa. He was still conscious, but his eyes were beginning to flutter, the terror being replaced by a strange, distant, unnervingly peaceful haze. His breathing was still shallow and labored.
Fine, I'm fine.
The words were a pathetic, slurred whisper, a last desperate lie from a man who'd spent his entire life running from any admission of weakness. Lisa gently brushed the damp, sweat-soaked hair from his forehead, her voice calm and steady and reassuring. I know you are, my love. Just rest. Just breathe. But when she looked up at Lou, her eyes were wide with barely concealed terror. The calm was a performance, a necessary, loving performance for the frightened man lying before her. But in her eyes, Lou saw the terrible, unspoken truth. Lou's fear, which had been paralyzing and useless, was instantly transformed by the cold fire of action. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers clumsy and trembling as she fumbled to unlock the screen.
I'm calling an ambulance.
No hospital.
The protest was weak and pathetic, almost inaudible, but it was enough to make Lou hesitate, her thumb hovering over the emergency button. She looked at her father, this proud, stubborn, impossible man, and knew that forcing him into an ambulance against his will would be a final, terrible cruelty. There had to be another way, a better way, a more familiar, family way. Her thumb scrolled frantically through her contacts until she found the name.
Scott, it's Lou.
Her voice was raw and barely controlled.
It's Dad. Something's wrong. Something's really, really wrong. I think, God, Scott, I think he's having a heart attack. You need to come to the Dude Ranch. Now, please, just please hurry.
While Lou made that call, Lisa was conducting her own very different mission. She'd moved to the quiet of the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. She knew with deep intuitive certainty that this moment didn't just belong to them. It didn't just belong to Team Tim and Lou. It belonged to all of them. The war, in this moment, was petty and stupid and completely irrelevant. Her voice when she spoke wasn't panicked. It was calm and steady, but with a terrible, urgent undertone. Amy, it's Lisa. Something's happened. It's your father. You and Ty need to come to the lodge. Now. She didn't offer details. She didn't need to. The raw, unmistakable truth in her voice was a message far more powerful than any explanation could be. She hung up and returned to the main room, to the terrible vigil. Miles away at the ruin, Amy and Ty heard those words, and the world stopped. They didn't ask questions. They didn't hesitate. They dropped their tools where they stood. They ran. The drive to the Dude Ranch was a frantic, silent blur. Amy stared out the window, her mind a screaming void of static. She didn't know what was happening. She only knew the sound of Lisa's voice, the terrible, honest terror she'd heard in it. Ty's truck skidded to a stop in the gravel driveway. They burst out and ran, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They threw open the door. And they walked into a war that was, in a single terrible moment, completely over. The scene before them was a frozen tableau of domestic terror. Lou was kneeling on the floor, her face pale and tear-streaked and unrecognizable. Lisa stood by the hearth, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror, and on the sofa, lying under a thick plaid blanket, was her father. He looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, more fragile, more vulnerable, more human. The anger, the resentment, the legal papers, the bitter words, all of it evaporated, burned away by the pure white fire of a single undeniable truth. That was her dad. Her impossible, infuriating, stubborn, beloved, broken, and now terribly sick and fragile dad. The cold, hard warrior queen was gone, and in her place was only a daughter, a shocked, scared, deeply heartbroken little girl.
Dad?
The word came out as barely a whisper. She moved across the room as if in a dream, her legs carrying her forward on instinct alone. She knelt beside the sofa, opposite Lou, and for the first time in weeks, the two sisters looked at each other. There were no words, no apologies, no explanations. Just two daughters, terrified and helpless, united by the one thing that had always connected them beneath all the arguments and all the pain, their father. Scott Cardinal arrived within 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. He came through the door carrying his medical bag, his face set in the calm, professional mask he wore in emergencies. But his eyes betrayed his concern when he saw Tim lying on the sofa. He knelt beside Tim, his movements quick and efficient. Stethoscope, blood pressure cuff, oxygen saturation monitor. His fingers found Tim's pulse rapid and irregular. He asked questions in that calm, steady voice that doctors use when things are very, very wrong, but panic would make them worse. Tim, can you hear me? Can you tell me where the pain is? Does it radiate to your arm? Your jaw? Tim nodded weakly, his hand still pressed against his chest. His voice when he spoke was barely audible.
Chest? Can't breathe right?
Scott's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked up at the circle of frightened faces surrounding him. Lisa, Lou, Amy, Ty, all watching with the desperate hope that he could fix this, that he could make it okay. His heart rhythm is irregular, blood pressure's elevated. Classic signs of cardiac distress. He needs to be in a hospital. Now.
No hospital, told them. No hospital.
Even now, even in pain and fear, Tim was stubborn. Scott looked at Lisa, and in that look was a conversation that needed no words. This was serious. This was potentially life-threatening. And Tim's refusal to go to the hospital could kill him. Tim, please, you need proper care. Please. Her voice broke on the last word. Tim looked at his wife, at the tears streaming down her face, and something in his expression softened. But before he could respond, Scott spoke again. I can stabilize him here for now, get his heart rate down, monitor him closely. But if there's any change, any deterioration at all, we call an ambulance. No arguments. Understood? He looked at Tim when he said it, and there was steel beneath the compassion. Tim, too weak to argue further, gave a small nod of surrender. What followed was a vigil. Scott administered medication, nitroglycerin to ease the chest pain, aspirin to thin the blood, beta blockers to slow the racing heart. He set up a portable ECG monitor that he kept in his truck for ranch emergencies. The steady beep of Tim's heartbeat filled the room, a sound that was both reassuring and terrifying in its irregularity. The family arranged themselves around the sofa like sentinels. Lisa sat beside Tim, holding his hand, her thumb making small circles on his palm. Lou remained on the floor, her back against the sofa, her head tilted back against the cushions. Amy sat in a nearby chair, Ty standing behind her with his hands on her shoulders. No one spoke about the feud, no one mentioned the legal battle or the property dispute, or any of the things that had seemed so desperately important just an hour ago. All of that had been rendered meaningless by the fragile rhythm of a sick man's heart. Scott stayed for 2 hours, monitoring Tim's vitals, adjusting medications, watching the ECG readout with the focused intensity of a man who knew he was all that stood between his patient and an ambulance ride. Tim might not survive. Gradually, slowly, Tim's heart rhythm began to stabilize. His color improved slightly, though he still looked gray and exhausted. His breathing became less labored. Finally, Scott sat back on his heels and allowed himself a small breath of relief. He's stable. For now. But this is serious, Tim. You've had a cardiac event. I don't know yet if it's a full heart attack or severe angina, but either way, you need follow-up care. You need to see a cardiologist, you need tests, and you need to make some serious changes. He looked around the room, taking in the tension that hung in the air even now, the unspoken history that radiated from every corner. Whatever stress you've been under, whatever's been weighing on you, it needs to stop. Your heart can't take it. Do you understand me? Tim nodded weakly. His voice was hoarse and tired.
Understood.
I'll come back tomorrow to check on you. But if anything changes, if the pain comes back, if he has trouble breathing, if he loses consciousness, you call 911 immediately. Promise me. It was Lisa who answered, her voice firm despite her tears. I promise. Scott left, and the room fell into a new kind of silence. Not the hostile silence of the past weeks, but the quiet of people who just stared into an abyss and stepped back from the edge. Tim lay on the sofa, his eyes closed, his breathing steady but shallow. Lisa sat beside him, unwilling to let go of his hand, and Lou and Amy remained where they were, close enough to touch but still separated by the weight of everything that had happened between them. It was Tim who finally spoke. His voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but in the quiet room it carried clearly.
I'm sorry.
The two words hung in the air. Lou looked up, her eyes red from crying. Amy leaned forward in her chair.
I'm so sorry. Both of you, for all of this.
His eyes opened, and they were full of tears. This man who never cried, who always fought, who never admitted weakness, he was crying.
I thought I was protecting the ranch, protecting our future, but all I did was destroy our family. I pushed, and I didn't listen, and God, I'm so sorry.
His voice broke on the last words. Lou reached up and took his other hand, pressing it to her cheek.
Dad, don't. You need to rest. We can talk about this later.
No, we can't, because there might not be a later. You hear what Scott said? My heart, it's breaking. Not just literally, it's breaking because I broke this family.
He looked at Amy, and the pain in his eyes was worse than any physical pain he'd experienced that morning.
Amy, I lied to you. About your grandfather's will. About what he wanted. I was so scared of losing everything, of failing again, that I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. But it wasn't. Jack would be ashamed of me, and I'm ashamed of myself.
The confession hung in the room like a thunderclap. Lou's head whipped around to look at her father, shock and confusion on her face. Amy sat frozen, her face unreadable.
The will, it said to rebuild. To honor Marion's memory, and I tried to talk him out of it. I tried to convince him it was impossible. But he was adamant. It was his dying wish, and I ignored it. I convinced Lou it couldn't be done. I hired lawyers to fight you, all because I was scared and proud and stupid.
Tears streamed down his face now, unchecked and unashamed.
I almost died today, and all I could think about when I couldn't breathe, when my heart was stopping, was that I was going to die with my daughters hating each other, that my last act on this earth would be destroying Jack's legacy instead of honoring it, and I can't do that. I won't do that.
He looked at Lou, then at Amy, his eyes pleading.
I'm withdrawing from the legal battle, all of it. The property is yours, Amy, to do with what Jack wanted, what I should have supported from the beginning. And if you never forgive me, if you can't, I understand. But please don't let what I did destroy what's left of this family. Don't let my mistakes cost you your sister.
The silence that followed was profound and absolute. Amy sat motionless, her mind trying to process what she'd just heard. The confession she'd wanted for weeks. The vindication she'd fought for. The truth she'd known in her heart but couldn't prove. It was all right there, given freely by a man who'd just faced his own mortality and found himself wanting. She looked at her father, this complicated, frustrating, impossible man who'd caused so much pain but who she still loved despite everything. Then she looked at Lou and saw her sister's face crumbling as the full weight of what their father had just said sank in.
Dad, you told me. You said it was impossible. You said Amy was being unrealistic. You said we'd lose everything if we didn't.
Her voice trailed off as understanding dawned. She'd been manipulated. They both had, not out of malice perhaps, but out of fear. And that fear had set them against each other, had turned sister against sister, had created a war that never needed to happen. Lou looked at Amy, and in her eyes was devastation and shame and a desperate plea for forgiveness.
Amy, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. He told me it couldn't be done. He showed me numbers and projections and made it seem like you were going to bankrupt us. I thought I was saving us. But I was wrong about everything.
Amy's response would determine everything that came next. The entire future of their family balanced on what she said in this moment. She could hold on to her anger. She could nurse her resentment. She could point out that Lou should have trusted her, should have asked more questions, should have chosen family over fear. Or she could do what Jack would have done, what he'd spent his entire life teaching them to do. She could forgive. Amy stood slowly and crossed the space between them. Lou looked up at her, tears streaming down her face, waiting for judgment. Instead, Amy knelt beside her sister and pulled her into a fierce, desperate hug. The dam broke. Lou sobbed against Amy's shoulder, months of tension and fear and guilt pouring out in great shuddering waves. Amy held her tighter, her own tears falling freely now.
It's okay. It's going to be okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have believed in you. I was so scared and so stupid, and I almost lost you forever.
You didn't lose me. I'm right here. We're right here.
They stayed like that for a long time. Two sisters who'd been at war, now united in grief and relief and the desperate, fragile hope of reconciliation. Around them, the rest of the family watched with tears in their eyes. Lisa still holding Tim's hand, Ty standing with his own hand pressed to his mouth, all of them witnessing the first tentative steps toward healing. When the sisters finally pulled apart, Amy turned to look at her father. Tim watched her with red eyes, waiting for her response to his confession. She could see the fear in his face, the fear that despite everything, she would walk away, that she would take her vindication and her anger, and leave him with the knowledge that he'd destroyed his family in his final act.
Dad, what you did was wrong. The lying, the manipulation, the lawyers, all of it. You hurt me. You hurt Lou. You hurt this whole family.
Tim nodded, accepting the judgment he knew he deserved.
But you're still my dad. And I still love you. Even when you're impossible and stubborn and make terrible decisions, you're still my father.
She moved to kneel beside the sofa, taking his hand in both of hers.
Grandpa always said, family is everything. That no matter what happens, no matter how angry we get, we don't give up on each other. And I'm not going to give up on you. On any of you.
I don't deserve your forgiveness.
Probably not. But you're getting it anyway, because that's what family does.
She squeezed his hand gently.
We're going to get through this. All of us, together. The way we should have from the beginning. The way Grandpa would have wanted.
Tim closed his eyes, fresh tears leaking from the corners. The weight he'd been carrying for months, the guilt, the fear, the shame seemed to lift slightly. It wasn't gone. It might never be fully gone, but it was bearable now, shared among the people who loved him despite his flaws. The rest of the day passed in a kind of exhausted peace. Tim dozed on the sofa, his heart monitor beeping steadily. Lisa stayed beside him, keeping watch. Lou and Amy sat together at the kitchen table, not saying much, just existing in each other's presence after weeks of bitter separation. There was a tentative quality to everything, like they were all learning how to be a family again after forgetting how. The wounds were too fresh for everything to be fixed immediately. Trust would take time to rebuild. Forgiveness was one thing, forgetting was another. But they were together, in the same house, breathing the same air, united by crisis and love and the fragile understanding that they'd almost lost everything that mattered. As evening approached, Ty made coffee. Lisa heated up soup. Amy and Lou set the table, moving around each other with careful politeness that would eventually, hopefully, become comfort again. They ate dinner together in the lodge for the first time in weeks, Tim propped up on the sofa with a bowl in his lap, insisting he was fine even though everyone could see he wasn't. It wasn't the joyful family reunion anyone would have wanted. It was quiet and awkward and full of unspoken pain. But it was a start, a first step back from the edge of the abyss they'd been staring into. As the sun set over the Alberta foothills, casting long shadows across the ranch, Amy stood at the window of the lodge, looking out at the land that had caused so much pain. Somewhere out there was the ruin that would become a house, Jack's dream, Marion's memory, the future they'd been fighting for. Lou came to stand beside her, and for a moment they just looked out at the familiar landscape together.
Do you really think we can do it? Build the house?
I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But we're going to try. Together.
Together.
The word felt strange after so long, but also right, like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory.
Things are going to be different now. We can't go back to the way things were.
No, we can't. But maybe we can build something better. Something stronger.
Maybe.
They stood in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. In the room behind them, Tim slept with Lisa keeping watch. Ty cleaned up the dinner dishes. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm, a reminder of how fragile everything was, how quickly it could all be taken away. But for now, in this moment, they were together, broken but healing, fractured but mending. A family that had stared into the darkness and found their way back to each other. The war wasn't completely over. There would still be difficult conversations to have, apologies to make, wounds to heal. But the battle that had defined them for the past months, the bitter, destructive fight that had torn them apart, that battle was done. And in its place was something tentative and fragile but infinitely precious: hope. Hello, everyone. That concludes today's episode of Heartland. Tim's cardiac event has forced the family to confront what really matters, bringing them together in a way that legal battles and angry words never could. Tim's confession has revealed the truth about Jack's will and the manipulation that set sister against sister. But while the war may be over, the journey to truly heal this family is just beginning. The ranch still faces financial pressures, the house still needs to be built, and trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Join us next time as we explore what comes after the crisis, when the family must learn to live together again and face the challenges ahead, not as enemies, but as the united team Jack always wanted them to be. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Until next time, this is Western Flavors.